Question 6. An undergraduate degree is necessary for appointment to the executive board. Further, no one with a felony conviction can be appointed to the board. Thus, Murray, an accountant with both a bachelor's and master's degree, cannot be accepted for the position of executive administrator since he has a felony conviction. All right, so first step, argument of facts. Clearly we have an argument or structural indicator of thus, so our conclusion is that Murray cannot be accepted for the position of executive administrator. And how do we know that? Well, first, it tells us two general principles. First, that an undergraduate degree is necessary for appointment to the executive board. You notice necessary. So we have sufficient and necessary. And our first principle is that an undergraduate degree is necessary, so undergraduate degree, for the appointment to the executive board. Contrapositive, reverse and negate. If you do not have an undergraduate degree, then you cannot be appointed to the executive board. The next sentence tells us no one with a felony conviction can be appointed to the board. No A's or B's. Again, we know that is also sufficient and necessary. So if you have a felony conviction, then you cannot be appointed to the executive board. Contrapositive, if you are appointed to the executive board, then you don't have a felony conviction. So those are our principles. It then tells us that Murray has a felony conviction, our premise. So our premise here is that Murray has a felony conviction, and it takes that to conclude that he cannot be accepted for the position of executive administrator. Is that a valid argument? And you notice the fact that Murray has a felony conviction, our premise, that is sufficient in our second principle, that no one with a felony conviction can be appointed to the board. It's sufficient for not being appointed to the executive board. But did they conclude that Murray can't be appointed to the executive board? No, the conclusion was that he can't be accepted for the position of executive administrator. So you notice the jump in this argument. We could properly conclude that Murray cannot be appointed to the executive board based on the premise that he has a felony conviction, because again, felony conviction is sufficient for not being appointed to the executive board. So the proper conclusion is that Murray can't be appointed to the executive board. Not that he can't be accepted for the position of executive administrator. So you notice the jump in this argument. So clearly this is a flawed argument. So now that we have a clear understanding of this argument, let's proceed to the question stem. The argument's conclusion follows logically if which of the following is assumed. Follows logically if. This is a strengthened with sufficient premise question. And we know that our strategy on these questions is to find the answer choice that 100% guarantees our conclusion. Again, our conclusion is that Murray can't be accepted for the position of executive administrator based on the premise that he has a felony conviction. But again, we know that the proper conclusion to draw from the fact that he has a felony conviction is that he can't be appointed to the executive board, as we've shown here. However, now if we want to guarantee that he also can't be accepted for the position of executive administrator, which is what a strengthened with sufficient premise question is asking us to do, well, then we have to tie this idea of not being able to be appointed to the executive board to not being able to be accepted for position of executive administrator. So you notice how we would guarantee it is to say that if you can't be appointed to the executive board, then you cannot be accepted for the position of executive administrator. That would guarantee this conclusion by closing the gap, again, because we know that Murray has a felony conviction that is sufficient for not being appointed to the executive board. And now if we make that sufficient for not being able to be accepted to the position of executive administrator, that would guarantee our conclusion. So now let's go through the answer choices. A, anyone with a master's degree and without a felony conviction is eligible for appointment to the executive board. Okay, great. Doesn't apply to our situation. We know Murray has a master's degree, but he also has a felony conviction. So A can't help us, so A would be eliminated. Does not even strengthen this argument. B, only candidates eligible for appointment to the executive board can be accepted for the position of executive administrator. And we know that only introduces a necessary condition. So only candidates eligible for appointment to the executive board would be our necessary condition. Our sufficient condition would be the other part of the statement, can be accepted for position of executive administrator. So you notice we're definitely on the right track. It's tying what we know, executive board, to the jump made in the conclusion of executive administrator. So you notice the contrapositive of B, if you can't be appointed to the executive board, then you can't be accepted to the position of executive administrator, is exactly what we said we needed to guarantee our conclusion. So B here would be the correct answer. Again, you notice why? Because we know that Murray has a felony conviction. Felony conviction is sufficient for not being appointed to the executive board. And now the contrapositive of B tells us that if you're not appointed to the executive board, you cannot be accepted to the position of executive administrator. Well, we know that Murray has a felony conviction, allows us to 100% conclude that he can't be accepted for the position of executive administrator. So we 100% guarantee the conclusion with B, so B would be the correct answer. But again, just make sure, C, an undergraduate degree is not necessary for acceptance for the position of executive administrator. Okay, fine. Well, Murray has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. Doesn't help us at all. Doesn't strengthen this argument. So C is out. D, if Murray did not have a felony conviction, he would be accepted for the position of executive administrator. Well, let's take a close look at D here just to show something quickly. If we know introduces sufficient, so if he did not have a felony conviction, then he would be accepted for the position of executive administrator. But the thing is, we know that Murray has a felony conviction. And for me to take that and conclude that he cannot be accepted for the position of executive administrator is incorrect. Don't just negate. We know that all carrots are vegetables, but just because something isn't a carrot doesn't mean it's not a vegetable, because there's other vegetables in this world. So D does not help us. Trap answer. And then just checking E, the felony charge on which Murray was convicted is relevant to the duties of the position of executive administrator. Well, that strengthens the argument. But the problem is we're not just trying to strengthen it, we're trying to 100% guarantee it, so E would be eliminated.